Did your family have favorites? If so, were you the favorite or someone else?
I used to think being invisible hurt less than being mocked, but every December proved me wrong. The first sting always came through social media. My family's annual Christmas photo popping up like clockwork on Facebook, everyone lined up in matching sweaters, the golden retriever in the front, the caption reading, "Family tradition never gets old." I would stare at it for a long time, scrolling through the comments filled with words like "beautiful family" or "so much love," and wait for anyone, to notice that I wasn't there. No one ever did. Sometimes my aunt would tag me out of pity, but then my sister Megan would quickly remove it, adding a little laughing emoji like it was some kind of inside joke. It started when I was 10, after my parents divorced and mom remarried. She insisted that the photo was about new beginnings. I didn't realize new meant without me. I lived mostly with my dad, and mom said it would be confusing to include me in pictures with her new family. The first year, I believed her. The second year, I cried in my room while dad pretended not to see. By the time I was 16, I learned to joke about it. "Guess they ran out of room on the couch again," I'd say, pretending I didn't notice they'd made room for the neighbor's dog that year. I built a life far away from those photos, but they never stopped showing up. Every year, like a little reminder that no matter what I did, I was still the outsider. Even after college, when I got my first decent job, mom would text me things like, "We'd love to have you next time if you're in town." I'd be in town every single time. I just wasn't invited. I once showed up unannounced, thinking maybe it was all a misunderstanding. I stood outside Grandma's house, where they always took the pictures, holding a pie I'd baked. Through the window, I saw them laughing and posing. Mom's new husband had his arm around her waist. Megan was showing off her engagement ring. And Grandma, the woman who used to braid my hair every Sunday morning, was beaming proudly in the center of it all. They looked perfect. I didn't belong in that frame, and they made sure I knew it. Years passed, and I built something that looked like success: long hours, no vacations, a growing company that felt more like therapy than work. I told myself I didn't care about Christmas photos or family dinners or the fact that no one ever asked how I was doing. But deep down, it ate at me. When you spend your entire life being told you don't fit, a small part of you always keeps trying to prove that you do. This year, I didn't even realize it was photo time until I saw it online again. Same backdrop, Grandma's porch, but new faces this time. Megan and her husband, holding their baby, the first grandchild. The comments poured in about how blessed they were, how proud mom must be. I scrolled through them while eating leftovers straight from the container, pretending it didn't bother me. But it did. The part that burned wasn't that I wasn't there. It was that no one even noticed my absence anymore. I wasn't forgotten, I was erased. The next morning, I got an email from work. Subject line: "Congratulations, you've made Forbes 30 under 30. I opened it, stared at the words, and laughed. Not the happy kind of laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere bitter and tired. I'd worked 12-hour days, slept in my office, eaten instant noodles until my stomach rebelled, and for what? Recognition from strangers when my own family couldn't remember my birthday without Facebook reminding them. But still, I felt something spark inside me, something that had been buried under years of quiet humiliation. I didn't tell my family. I didn't post it online. I just sat with it for a while, feeling the weight of the irony. They'd built their little world around tradition and appearances, and I'd spent my life trying to earn a seat in a room I was never invited to. And now here I was, successful by every definition they'd ever respected. I had money in the bank, people quoting my interviews, my name in a magazine they all read. Yet somehow, the thought of their smiling faces without me still made my chest tighten like I was 16 again, standing on Grandma's lawn, holding a pie that no one asked for. That night, I poured a glass of wine and scrolled through the family picture again. I zoomed in on my mom's smile, Megan's baby, Grandma's wrinkled hands clutching the arm of a man who'd never been part of my life. They looked so happy, so content. I imagined them all sitting around after the photo, laughing about the year's achievements, probably mentioning my name only as a punchline. And I realized something. Maybe it wasn't enough to be successful somewhere else. Maybe I needed them to see it, to feel it. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the last of the wine, and whispered to myself, they forgot to tag me again. Then I smiled, the kind of smile that comes with a plan forming quietly in the back of your mind. They forgot to tag me again, I repeated softly. So this time, I'll tag myself. I didn't know how yet, but one thing was certain. I was done being the invisible one in their perfect little portrait. They wanted a picture without me? Fine. But soon, the whole town would see the kind of picture they couldn't crop me out of. The morning after I promised myself I would stop being the invisible person in a photograph I never ruined and never asked to join, I woke up with that particular kind of clarity that arrives when anger finally burns clean and what remains is not hysteria or self-pity, but a hard plan taking shape, and, while coffee dripped and the apartment hummed its weekday noises, I opened the family photo again and studied it like a blueprint. The soft porch light that made everyone glow, the careful way my mother angled her shoulder to hide the truth that she always chooses a side, the way my sister Megan presented her child to the camera like a certificate of worthiness, and the small half-smile on Grandma's face that used to belong to me when she braided my hair and called me her little wild thing, back before tradition became a locked door I learned to stop rattling. I wanted to be better than pettiness, I really did, but there is a difference between petty and precise, and precision was what I finally owed myself. So I called Kayla and told her I was done explaining my existence to people who wrote me out of the cast list, and then pretended not to notice the empty space, and she laughed that sharp, honest laugh of hers and said, "All right then, what's the move?" Because she knows that if I'm calling before 9 on a weekday, I'm not looking for comfort, I'm looking for execution. I told her about the email from Forbes, yes, with all the words spelled out and ridiculous, and she sucked in her breath and said, "Do you want to scream it on every roof or drop it like a quiet grenade?" And I said, neither. I want them to trip over it on their way to pretending I don't exist. Before I could talk myself out of it, I hunted down the clean black and white headshot the magazine requested, the one where I look like I know exactly who I am and why I built what I built, and I called the little frame shop 2 blocks from Grandma's street, the one that used to fill her hallway with needlepoint and baptisms and graduation tassels, and I asked the owner whether they still did same-day Mattis for a portrait about 8 by 10, and when he said yes, with the gentle confidence of a man who has studied 1,000 sentimental hands, I sent the file with a note he didn't need to read, but I typed anyway. "Please deliver this on my behalf to Mrs. Lawson at the corner house with the maple tree, and if she asks who it's from, tell her it's from the granddaughter, who still sends thank you cards." On the way to the office, I remembered the last Christmas I had tried to make the porch photo less of a wound and more of a bruise. I had asked Megan if I could stop by for only 10 minutes, stand in the back row, hold the dog, smile like a normal person. And she said with that polished kindness she uses when she wants to be cruel without getting caught that it was not really up to her, and that the photographer only booked tight slots for household units, which, she said, was just how they organized it now, and then she sent a snowflake emoji and a heart like a period at the end of a sentence I never wanted to read, and I went home and made soup and told myself I was a grown woman with better things to do than care about sweaters. Yet something cleaved that evening, and I have been walking around with the raw edge ever since. By lunch, the frame was ready, the matte a clean bone white with a narrow charcoal edge, the glass weighty, the backing sealed as if it were a document meant for a courthouse rather than a living room, and the shop owner, who introduced himself as Victor like a character in a book who exists to do one good thing at exactly the right time, wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with real string, not tape, and he wrote in a hand that could have belonged to a careful schoolteacher, "Add me to the wall," which I hadn't asked him to write but which, when I saw it, made my breath catch because it was exactly what I wanted without saying it aloud. The package arrived at Grandma's just after 3, or so Kayla confirmed after texting the neighbor she somehow knows from a summer softball league, and 30 minutes later my phone lit up with a call from my mother that I let ring out, then another that I declined, and then a message that started with, "Honey, what is this?" and rolled into a familiar blend of concern and control, as if the framed portrait were an act of weather I had unleashed rather than an ordinary piece of paper under glass. While she kept talking to a line that had already gone quiet, I opened my drafting app, pulled up a map of town, and traced the route people drive from the grocery store to Grandma's, from church to the porch, from the highway exit to the little two-lane that always bottlenecks near the maple tree. And the thought came not as a shout but as a simple fact. There are places in a life where you cannot be ignored, not because you begged for a chair at a crowded table, but because you built your own table and set it down exactly where they have to pass. When Megan finally texted, it was not rage or apology, which would have been easier to metabolize, but performance. So proud of you, sis. Grandma got your picture. Such a sweet surprise. Can we talk later about how to include you in next year's photos in a way that feels right for everyone? And I sat there marveling at the choreography of it, the way she wrapped ownership and distance into one sentence. And I typed and deleted the reply at least 5 times before I wrote what I should have said years ago. You don't get to manage my existence like a calendar invite, and you don't get to call it inclusion when what you mean is containment. Then paused, breathed, and hit send, because sometimes revenge is not noise. It is a boundary finally enforced with a closed door. I suppose that could have been enough for a day, the framed portrait arriving uninvited to the house that taught me how it feels to be uninvited, the neat little line of text turning into a scramble of explanation. But when the neighbor posted a photo of Grandma's hallway, the new frame sitting dead center between Megan's baby and the class portrait of people who apparently qualified as family when I did not, I felt the smallest click of something inevitable, like tumblers aligning inside a lock, and I knew the next move was not about a living room or a caption or a comment thread. It was about the road itself, the public artery that had always carried other people's narratives past me. Because the only way to make them look without pretending to ask was to place my face where looking away would require an effort they don't usually spend on me. That was when Kayla, who likes to pretend she believes in coincidence even though she knows better, forwarded a message from an old marketing contact who wrote, in the most casual tone, that a single billboard on the route by the maple tree had just opened up for the week before Christmas because a furniture store missed a payment and the agency was offering a discount if someone could confirm by tomorrow morning, and Kayla added nothing except, "If you want it, say the word," which is how best friends lay down the match and wait for you to decide whether you're ready to strike it. The next morning arrived heavy with the kind of silence that fills a room after a storm, that deceptive stillness where you realize nothing has changed outwardly, but everything inside you has shifted. And while I stared out the window of my apartment, watching the city thaw into motion, the idea that had first flickered like a dangerous joke the night before began to solidify into something deliberate, something real, something that no longer asked for permission. I poured coffee, not tasting it, and opened the map Kayla had sent, the stretch of road curving toward Grandma's neighborhood, lined with antique stores, a pharmacy that never seemed to close, and the billboard that stood tall at the bend like an unblinking witness to everyone's routines. It was exactly where the annual photo group would drive every year after their matching sweater performance, heading to the diner for pancakes and self-congratulation. That billboard wasn't a backdrop. It was a statement carved into the skyline. By 10 a.m., I was sitting across from a marketing rep whose name I didn't bother to catch, because she was just the gatekeeper to what I wanted, and I wasn't in the mood for introductions. She asked what kind of campaign I was running, and I told her it was personal. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not with judgment but with curiosity, the quiet kind people reserve for someone who doesn't look like they need to advertise anything. I handed her the same black and white portrait Forbes had used, the one where I looked calm but unshakably certain, the one taken after 3 nights of no sleep, when exhaustion had polished every edge of my ambition into something sharp enough to cut through pity. Simple layout, I said. My name, the Forbes mention, and one line underneath. Remember me now? She tilted her head, waiting for context that I never offered. The moment she asked for payment details, I wired the money without blinking. The cost didn't matter, it was cheaper than years of silence. As I left her office, the winter wind scraped my face like sandpaper, and the air smelled faintly of rain. I thought about all the times my family had said I was too intense, that my problem was never knowing when to let things go, and I smiled at how right they were. Letting go is what people say when they've already won. The rest of us have to build our closure piece by piece. I passed a cafe where Megan had once met me for coffee, the day she told me she was expecting. She'd ordered oat milk and fake compassion, saying how she hoped we could heal the distance between us now that she was starting a family, as if the distance had been accidental, a product of geography instead of exclusion. I remember stirring sugar into my coffee until it turned cold, thinking that maybe she believed her own script. I had nodded and said, "Sure, Meg," knowing full well that healing to her meant rewriting the story so she could keep the halo. When I got back to my apartment, Kayla was waiting, cross-legged on my couch, holding her laptop like a co-conspirator. She had the Billboard preview on her screen, the mock-up already rendered in grayscale, my face against a dark backdrop, bold white letters shouting my name to anyone who dared glance up from their car. It was stunning, brutal, clean. "It's going to make them insane," she said, half laughing, half whispering, because even she could feel the electricity of what we were doing. I stared at it for a long time, my reflection ghosting over the image, and said, "No, it's going to make them remember." We set the date for installation, 2 days before Christmas, the same day they'd scheduled their annual photo. The timing wasn't coincidence, it was choreography. I pictured them piling into the car, Grandma humming carols, Mom fussing with her hair, Megan scrolling through Instagram to make sure her eyeliner caught the light, and then that moment, the inevitable one, when they'd turn that corner and see me. Not standing outside their porch or lingering in the comments, but 10 feet tall, my face unmissable, my existence uneditable. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept looping through the years, the birthdays I spent alone, the times I'd mailed gifts that never got acknowledged, the Christmas cards that came addressed only to the family, as though my name had expired. I realized I wasn't doing this to humiliate them. Humiliation would have been too easy, too obvious. I was doing it to balance something invisible, to reclaim the version of me that had been quietly cropped out of their lives. I wanted the Billboard to be less revenge and more reminder, a visual record that I existed beyond their frames, that my worth wasn't dependent on their inclusion. Still, when I imagined their reactions, I couldn't help but feel a small, wicked thrill rise through my chest, the kind that comes from finally flipping the narrative. The day before the installation, I got a voicemail from Mom. Her voice carried that tone she uses when she's trying to sound gentle, but ends up brittle instead. "Sweetheart, I heard from Megan that you sent Grandma something very thoughtful, by the way. We'd love to see you this weekend if you're free. Maybe stop by during the photo? We can find a spot for you this time." I replayed it twice, stunned by the casual audacity of this time. As if inclusion were a seasonal offer, not a right long denied. I didn't call back. The morning of the Billboard reveal, I dressed like I was going to war. Black coat, hair slicked back, sunglasses, even though the sky was pale and overcast. Kayla picked me up with 2 coffees and a grin that said she knew this was more than a stunt. It was closure disguised as spectacle. We parked across the street from the lot where workers were finishing the installation. When the tarp came down, the world seemed to hold its breath. My image glared down at the road, the caption crisp, the message undeniable. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I whispered, "There I am." An hour later, my phone buzzed, first with a message from Megan. "Emma, what the hell did you do?" Then one from Mom. "Everyone's talking about it. Please call me." And finally, a voicemail from Grandma, her voice small and trembling. "You look beautiful up there, darling. Everyone's stopping to see." I turned to Kayla, the corners of my mouth tightening into a slow, measured smile. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. For the first time, the frame was mine. The thing about a small town that pretends it runs on manners is that it actually runs on spectacle, and by mid-morning the Billboard had turned into exactly that, with cars braking just enough to earn a honk, shoppers standing outside the pharmacy with paper bags and opinions, and my name floating over the maple tree like a headline no one could scroll past. So when Kayla and I parked 2 blocks from Grandma's street and walked the familiar route past the church, the barber, and the thrift, store that still smelled like wool and lemon oil. I felt the strange, unsettling calm of a person who has placed a truth exactly where it can no longer be quietly filed away. I didn't plan to see them. I planned to see the town see them, which is different and, if we're honest, far more instructive, because applause is soft, but scrutiny is loud, and today, I wanted the volume up. The first fallout arrived as whispers that were not meant for me, but found me anyway. The woman outside the bakery telling her friend that the Lawson girl had always been the sharp one, and how it was a shame, really, that families get messy. And the retired teacher who used to dock me points for attitude, now telling a clerk that talent must run in the blood, as if blood had ever paid my rent or answered my calls. And then the owner of the frame shop, Victor, stepping onto the sidewalk to straighten a sign and catching my eye with a nod that compressed a small lifetime of complicity and repair into one gentle acknowledgement. He didn't say congratulations, and I didn't say thank you, because what we had made together wasn't a celebration. It was a correction. Across the street, the diner was doing its reliable Saturday thunder, and if there is one piece of choreography my family never misses, it is pancakes after the porch, so the night before, while the art file for the Billboard zipped through servers and approvals. I called the print vendor who does the diner's seasonal placemats and, with a payment that would have funded a dozen breakfasts and 24 roomers, ordered a 1-week run of simple, sturdy sheets featuring my headshot in the lower corner with a line beneath it that read, plainly and without polish, "This seat is not empty," then arranged with the manager to comp every table that morning in the name of a hometown girl who grew up and paid her tab. Asking him to put the note on the receipts where no one could miss it. It wasn't cruelty, it was symmetry, and if it landed like a slap it was only because silence had been their open hand for years. We slipped into a booth by the window, and I watched the small theater unfold, the cluster of teenagers pretending not to care until one of them snapped a photo, the pastor's wife folding the placemat carefully. The way people do when they think something might be collectible later, the line cook leaning through the pass to squint at the design and mutter something that made the waitress laugh into her sleeve, and then, as if a stage manager had finally barked places, the sedan with my mother in the passenger seat and Megan in back, the baby buckled into a car seat that looked like a tiny throne, rolling into a space so perfect it felt faded. They walked in, cheeks flushed from winter and pride. And it took exactly one heartbeat for the room to turn its head, another heartbeat for Megan to clock the placemat, and a third for my mother to register the free breakfast note with the same expression she used the first time I told her I'd incorporated. Surprise curdled with calculation. I didn't hide, because hiding has its place and that place is over, so I lifted my coffee cup in a quiet salute that was neither welcome nor challenge and watched my mother decide, right there between the hostess stand and the specials board, whether to choose dignity or performance. She chose the latter, because she always does, calling out my name as if we were an ordinary family that enjoyed ordinary sightings, loud enough that the room could file it under civility, then adding with a brittle brightness of a person auditioning for grace, that she had just been saying how proud she was, and wasn't the town wonderful, and didn't everyone love to lift each other up, and perhaps we could all sit together if there was space. There was space, of course, because I had paid for space in more ways than one, but I looked at Kayla, who raised one eyebrow with the kind of loyalty that asks nothing and promises everything, and I said to my mother, in a tone I had practiced in empty apartments and elevator mirrors, that I would not be sitting in a frame I did not design, though I hoped her pancakes were as sweet as the story she was telling herself. The murmurs rose and fell like a tide, and I let them carry the moment away, because revenge that explains itself becomes apology, and I am done apologizing. I signed the check for a meal that didn't need my money and left before Megan could sharpen her voice into the blade she keeps for occasions like this. And we walked the 2 blocks to Grandma's Street where the maple tree bent into the winter sky, and the billboard looked almost serene, as if it had always been there and might always be there, and then I saw it through the front window of the house where porch pictures are born, my family rearranged around a hastily moved mantel, the old portraits shifted, and, right in the center where the wreath usually hangs, a glossy letter-size printout of my billboard taped at the corners, Crooked because haste is a poor decorator, while a neighbor holding an iPhone counted them into a smile, which is what passes for inclusion when the mirror turns into a window. For a second, I didn't know whether to laugh or scream, but the impulse passed, replaced by a steadier feeling, something like acceptance mixed with strategy, and I realized that the point had never been to be invited inside. Not when the entire street had already become a witness, so I pulled my coat tighter against the wind and turned back toward the car, and that was when my phone vibrated with a number I hadn't seen in years. The display spelling out a name I had almost stopped associating with authority or tenderness, and I felt the ground tilt as my father's voice, careful and older than I remembered, came through the line and said my name in a way that made it sound like a beginning rather than a reprimand, then asked, without ceremony and without a script, whether we could talk somewhere quiet, just the two of us, before anything gets louder. When I met my father at the park that still smelled like wet leaves and metal swings, he stood near the bench the way people do when they are deciding whether to sit in the past or keep their balance in the present. And when he finally spoke my name, it landed without the weight of an agenda, which startled me more than any apology could have, because I had trained myself to hear family words as weapons disguised as invitations. Yet his voice arrived with a quiet that felt like a room I could actually enter without lowering my head, and he said he had seen the billboard, then the placemats, then the porch rearranged like a set built in a hurry, and that he had spent the morning thinking about the sentence I had finally written across the entire town. This seat is not empty. He did not ask why, because if a person has to ask, they have not been paying attention, and he did not perform pride the way the others were already doing on speakerphone. He simply said that he remembered the first Christmas after the divorce when I stood on the front steps with a pie and a hope so large it looked like armor, and how he had told himself not to cause a scene by pushing past a closed door, a choice that had been dressed up as maturity. And he wanted me to know that he had mistaken quiet for care for far too long. We walked along the path by the water, not touching, not listing grievances like invoices, and he told me that there had been a conversation years ago in which my mother asked the photographer to keep households separate for clarity and tradition, and that the rule had hardened into doctrine because rules are easier to enforce than love, and that he had not pushed back because the town was small and the fallout would have been loud, and he thought he was protecting me from becoming a spectacle, which, we both realized with a strange, rueful laugh, is exactly what I had now engineered on my own terms, not because I needed noise, but because I needed the silence to carry a different message. He said he could not fix the past with one conversation, and I said I did not require him to, and in that exchange something uncoiled between us, the old rope of blame slackening enough that we could step over it without tripping. Then he did the simplest, bravest thing he could have done, which was to ask what I wanted from him now, not later, not in statements polished for relatives, but in the next week when the town would keep looking up and the house on the corner would keep pretending nothing had been learned. I told him I wanted one act of recognition that did not depend on my mother's calendar, or my sister's comfort, or the performance of belonging that always arrived a day late. And he nodded and said that he had a key to the old studio on Main where the photographer kept the backdrops and lights, and that if I wanted a photograph, a real one, he would stand in it with me, not because public proof makes love truer, but because sometimes a picture is not about proof at all, it is about a record you can hold when the air gets rewritten against you, and the way he said it made me feel 12 again and 31 at the same time, which is to say seen, so I said yes, and that evening, under soft lamps and a backdrop that looked nothing like a porch and everything like a beginning, we took a picture in which no one asked me to stand further back, and we framed it in the studio with Victor's help, and the frame felt heavier than glass. It felt like a hinge. Revenge, if that is still the right word when an action heals more than it harms, came quietly the next morning when I asked the Billboard agency for a 1-week extension and a change to a second panel they had near the highway exit. Not to duplicate the original face that had done its work, but to run a new, restrained layout with a line that read "Applications open for the Lawson Fellowship." A small scholarship I registered overnight with my company lawyer for any local kid who had ever been told they did not fit the frame and had learned to shrink themselves rather than resize the border, and I funded it with the speaking fee Forbes had just offered for a follow-up feature. Because I wanted the attention to be useful even if the family conversation never would be, and because the surest way to keep a story from devouring you is to feed someone else with it. The town liked that better than the Billboard, or maybe it simply gave them a way to approve of me without taking sides, but I did not care, because the revenge I wanted most was to stop needing a witness for every wound. When the studio portrait of my father and me was ready, I did not mail it to the maple treehouse, and I did not ask for wall space in a corridor that had served as a museum of my absence. I sent it to the frame shop with a simple instruction for Victor to hang it in his front window for 1 week, label it Lawson, 2 subjects, and move on, and although it seems theatrical, it felt exact. Because it placed our truth in a public place without pleading for entry into a private myth, and it allowed anyone who wanted to notice to do so without being told what to think, which is, I'm learning, the only respectful way to correct a narrative. By afternoon, messages multiplied, Megan requesting a meeting to align on next steps, which is how she says she intends to manage me, my mother offering a carefully worded opening for me to join the family at the diner next Sunday as a sign that we are moving forward, which translated to me as a request to stand down so that her version of grace could stand up. And then the email from the magazine with a cheerful subject line about the profile piece going live if I could provide a photo from the town where it all started, along with a note asking whether my family might appear on camera, because audiences love closure, and closure with matching sweaters absolutely explodes. I stared at those requests until the letters swam, and I thought about what I had wanted at the start of this whole thing, which was not applause or humiliation or even justice. It was a refusal to live cropped. I opened a blank reply and typed that I would consider a photo from the studio window and that as for the rest, I would not make my life digestible for people who preferred a tidy ending to an honest one, then deleted the draft and closed my laptop, because I understood that not every answer deserves the dignity of being written down. As the sun slid behind the highway sign and the second panel lit up with the fellowship announcement, my phone buzzed with a text from Grandma that was maddeningly simple and therefore impossible to ignore. She said the town had looked different this week and that she had been thinking about the year she taught me to braid my own hair, so I would not have to sit and wait for someone else to do it. And while part of me wanted to fire back a catalog of every time she had set out extra chairs for others and not for me, another part of me, the part that had finally stood under a hot lamp and asked for a picture on her own terms, sat very still and let the message land without verdict. A car rolled by and someone honked. Not at me but at the traffic, yet it felt, for a second, like acknowledgement, and when my inbox chimed again with the magazine's producer asking, one more time, whether my mother might be comfortable offering a quote, I looked at my father's number on my screen, then at the window where our portrait stood under Victor's careful lights, and I raised the phone without typing, letting the moment hover between yes and no, between performance and privacy, between the family I was born into and the one I am finally allowed to assemble. And I decided that the most honest revenge tonight would be to keep the answer to myself and walk past the billboard without looking up, because the point had never been to be seen forever. It had been to know, at last, that I could walk away without disappearing.